Good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome to the latest webinar at the School of Natural Esoterics. And today I am so pleased to be discussing emotional patterns and transforming emotional patterns and how to make our relationship, how to have healthy, conscious relationships with our emotions with my good dear friend Donna. So Donna and I have known each other for quite a while now, actually. We met in the Amazon and we both share the same Amazonian teacher. And we both have a strong passion for inner transformation and plants. And so Donna's gone on to, she's an embodiment coach. And she's also kind of finishing off her transpersonal psychology master's degree. And we've both transformed our lives over the last decade through the use of plant medicine, through the kind of communion with common native plants. And we have also incorporated a lot of kind of practices from wisdom traditions and psychology, modern psychology, traditional psychology. And so today Donna is going to take us through how we can transform our emotions as they come up when we're perhaps doing plant diets or as they arise in the moment. So welcome, Donna. Hi.
Hello. First of all, I just want to say I'm so grateful to be here. I have known this woman for a lot of years now, and we have been through some pretty crazy journeys together, and so it's really such a joy to be getting to share this space with you, truly.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I'm so pleased you're here. So, yeah, let's dive right in. So, okay, as an embodiment coach, let's start at the beginning. How do we feel our emotions? How do our emotions kind of reside in our body? How do they get activated? What's the kind of like emotional anatomy, if you like? Because we don't actually know how to deal with our emotions very well. We're not taught how to deal with them, not taught how to process them. We think we're dealing with them, but we're suppressing them. So to start off getting to know our emotions really intimately, how do they work in our body?
Everybody's emotional experience is going to be unique and different to them, so I do want to just honour that to start with. However, there is something really important, which is the way that we currently, most people in society, feel and experience our emotions isn't a true emotional experience, mainly because we have so much conditioning around emotional expression being something that is not socially acceptable, that most of the time we are trying to control our emotional experience. As you named, we might be suppressing them, trying to repress them, thinking that we can control our emotions when, truthfully, an emotional reaction is an automatic process. It happens in the body, it activates biological functions, and so emotions arise is not something that we can actually control, and yet most of us are trying to control them, which means that the way that most of us experience emotions isn't the true way that an emotion would feel if we were actually given it space. And so to answer your question, what's the anatomy of an emotion? It is said that actually, if you were to fully feel an emotion, that as it passes through your system, it's probably not going to last more than 2 or 3 minutes at its full intensity. This is because emotions actually pass through the ways that thoughts pass through. And so people often think that our body and our emotions are very different to our thoughts, but in everyday life, we know that we'll have passing thoughts that don't necessarily have to mean anything, whereas our emotions just rise, they come up, and they pass through. They are there for a reason, so they're usually rising up to give us a message, to tell us to come into presence, to be like, hey, there's something that you should pay attention here. And then once you've paid attention, they will naturally pass. What does happen is that most of us are so uncomfortable and don't know how to be in that emotion that as they enter into our system, we actually either lock down or push away And that kind of is where it starts to get blocked. It starts to get locked in the body. And so, yeah, a natural emotion is actually just like a passing thought. It just arises and it passes. It comes, it gives us a message, something that it needs us to know, something to pay attention about our environment, something to pay attention about inside, and then it would naturally pass. However, the way that we deal with them tends to lock it in and make them last for many months or years even.
And so how does it lock into the body? Because I know that, all illness, disease underneath has an emotional drive. It has an emotional fuel. And even though it's kind of subconscious, and so we've kind of usually repressed it, so it's deep there somewhere, but it's in the body, because the body, the mind, the energy field, it's all one. So in the body, how does it get locked in there?
I think even in the question, you have the answer. The emotions are part of the body. And so we often talk about like mind, body and spirit as a way to be healthily balanced. And emotions are part of our embodied experience. Now, a lot of what I am talking about emotionally comes from much more of a somatic view. And so there may be different schools, but from the schooling that I'm approaching is emotions are part of our embodied experience. Now, what can happen is because most of us try to think our way through our emotions. So when an emotion comes up, we're trying to use the brain, the mind, to process it, then the body can't actually finish its cycle. Another thing that can happen is that emotions can often be very linked to stress cycles. They don't have to be, but they often become quite linked to a stress cycle. And so a stress cycle, once again, this is what most people know, will go into fight, flight, freeze, and you want to finish the stress cycle. You want to come back to neutral so that your nervous system knows that it's safe. Well, if an emotion arises and your nervous system recognizes it as a stressor, and so it starts to react to it and it creates a stress response, then the emotion now gets entangled with that stress response. And if we do not finish the cycle and come back to safety, come back to a place where we can actually let that emotion be liberated from the stress cycle, so liberated from the body, then it gets caught inside. The reason it gets caught in the body is because it is an embodied experience. And so again, emotions, when you actually feel them, have this natural movement to them. They naturally transform. When you lock it down, it can't move. And so you'll tend to find a lot of people with trapped emotions will have their solar plexus will be quite tight. Their stomach will be quite tight because they're literally where the emotion arises and is moving, it will get stuck there because you are almost tensing the muscles, though it is beyond just the muscular system, and you're holding the emotions inside of your body because feeling it feels too dangerous. And then the stress cycle doesn't complete.
And I find it fascinating where kind of things get trapped in the body, because I think we all, in Chinese medicine, they say that, grief and sadness gets trapped in the lungs, the anger gets trapped in the liver, the organs and their consciousness hold those trapped emotions. But that's true. I've really found that. But actually, I found things trapped in other parts of my body as well. So if I've been having shiatsu, for example, I'll just get kind of pressed on my shoulder and suddenly, I'll kind of like tears will well up, or even kind of like an emotional dream will just kind of like, I'll remember a dream and I'm like, I actually trapped a dream in my body as well. So, shoulders, feet, hands, we can actually trap things in any part of our body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to be a body worker, and one of the shoulder issues called frozen shoulder is actually, medically, they don't know the cause, and it often comes after a huge emotional trauma of some kind. So it really can get trapped anywhere. It's not selective.
Yeah, I know. I remember your amazing massages with a lot of they were ceremonial, your massages. Honestly, they were kind of emotional roller coasters within themselves. They were amazing, honestly. They were really, truly something else. They weren't really massages, were they? They were kind of, deep healing processes that you took people through. So, okay, let's bring the plants in. So, we both work with plants. We've both worked with psychoactive plants, common native plants, and we've both been doing plant diets for years. And so we've moved through a lot of our inner processes, a lot of our shadow work, a lot of our trapped emotions, and using various methodologies with those plants. And we can work with plants, for healing in lots of different ways. So you could take your St. John's wort tincture, and that will help with your nervous system. That'll help repair your nerve endings even, and that's your intention when you're taking that St. John's wort tincture. But take that St. John's wort tincture with the intention to heal emotionally or to heal spiritually, or to meet the spirit of St. John's wort, and you'll interact with that medicine in a completely different way. And so intention is really the key for working with plants. But also, in your experience, when we work with the plants and they bring our emotions up for us to look at, how have you kind of dealt with that? Because I know that some people find that process really traumatic, because emotions can suddenly be there in your face, things that you've forgotten for a long, long time, that you've repressed for a reason because it's really painful. So in your experience, how have you worked through with the plants that kind of process?
I feel like there's a couple of aspects to this. There's one which is the aspect that plants really serve to bring them up, and especially some of the psychoactive ones, whether you are intending to or not, they will often bring them up. And then the other one is how they can support us. And in the fact that plants bring them up to the surface is plants ultimately are always trying to bring us into balance, into healing, and they're there to support us. And no matter what intention we have when we're working with them, it is almost always this level of, okay, how can I come back into wholeness? How can I come back into this healed state? To fully show up in the world as a human, our emotional experience is one of the key aspects, not just in feeling alive and receiving the world and actually feeling alive in the world, but it's also one of the key aspects in us being able to actually stand in our fullness, in our wholeness, to actually show up fully as ourselves. And so what happens, as we said before, so many of us are conditioned that emotions are bad, or even if emotions are good, that we should not express them. And so we aren't taught how to express them. So when we begin working with plants, and especially a lot of the psychoactive plants, they're going to show you that which is most limiting you most of the time. And for a lot of people, that emotional expression is what's limiting them. Now, that can be repression. It can also be overindulgence. Because I don't want to leave that out. Like, sometimes we will be very overindulgent with certain emotions and like very repressive towards others, because we are so highly dualistic when it comes to emotions, even often in spaces that are quite non-dualistic. People will still be quite dualistic about, well, this emotion is bad, we shouldn't feel it, this emotion is good. And so the plants, with their non-dual nature, they will bring up where we are locked down. Now, when we don't have the support and the intention, that can be pretty overwhelming. I mean, we were in the Amazon together. That was pretty intense. We definitely lived through some things. And for me, coming out of that process, it did take a time of integration, because it unearthed so much that then I knew that I now needed to integrate and learn to take forward. And actually, I do believe that you can use plants to unearth, but you can also use plants to move forward with. And so I actually think that they are really helpful for both. The way that they're helpful to support us in actually doing the emotional work is that most of us have these relationship with emotions for a good reason. It means that some part of us is terrified. Some part of us maybe feels that if we actually feel this emotion, maybe we'll be rejected from our community, maybe we won't belong, maybe we're imperfect, or we'll make a mistake, or we'll be judged. There's so many reasons that we might not feel safe in experiencing or expressing an emotion. And so actually when we begin to work with emotions that have often been repressed since childhood, because that is how most of us are brought up, doing it alone can be really intense. Now, when you work with the plants intentionally to move forward, you actually have this other being, this other energy that gets to hold you, that gets to hold you in safety so that you can begin to explore these very tender places. I think when you try to just go into emotional work, and especially with some of those repressed emotions, I mean, it can bring up they're repressed for a reason, or they're overindulgent for a reason. And so having the support of another being so that you can actually feel safe in that exploration, and also they can help you to navigate so that you don't re-traumatize yourself, so that you don't cause more conditioning that this emotion is bad. And so I do believe that you can use plants to bring it up. I feel like Rose is a really good example with this, because Rose works for me for both. Like, Rose will bring up those emotions that are stopping you, that are shutting your heart, that are blocking you, and they tend to be the pretty painful emotions. But Rose also beautifully holds you in a way that you can actually move forward with them and face them and begin to explore how you can feel that and open your heart to emotions, open your body to emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, it's true that when you look at the energetic qualities of the transformational plants, so some plants are a lot more transformational than others. Some are a lot more powerful than others. That's just naturally how they are. And some of the plant spirits are much more powerful in their elemental qualities as well. And so like you say, those transformational plants, when you look at the elemental qualities in, say, a book or whatever, they're often protective at the same time, because it's so clever. Nature's just so clever. You need that protection, you need that holding, the extra kind of like bolstering while you're vulnerable. Because when we're energetically vulnerable, and this is, you know, when we're going through something, when we've got something coming up for us, when we're when we're going through trauma, we're very vulnerable energetically. You know, it's like we're kind of like much more psychically open. And so we have to be protected in some way. And so the plants really step into that role. It's such a beautiful process. But saying that, they do allow us to experience things that just kind of take us right to the edge, they don't let you sit in your comfort zone too long, otherwise you wouldn't grow. So, they do allow, especially when you're doing shamanic training, they allow your plant allies will actually allow things to infiltrate your energy field, so you know what it feels like, so you know how to deal with it, etc. And so you can determine what is your emotion and what's something else's emotion. What's actually your emotion, or what's actually making you feel that emotion to kind of feed off it. That's what attachments in the energy field, the entities do. So how can people differentiate? And I get this question quite a lot actually from clients. How do you differentiate what's your emotion or what you've picked up from someone else? Or something else?
Well, before I fully answer that, I actually want to preface it with just highlighting what you just shared and how we can practice with plants to understand emotional relation, like what it is to relate to another being within our emotions. And so even just practicing that, because there's one thing about being comfortable in our own emotional experience, it's another very different thing to be comfortable in our own emotional experience in the presence of another, because then there's a whole other array. And so when we actually work with a plant, we get this opportunity to begin to experience, okay, when an emotion arises, how can I feel it? to answer your question, how do I differentiate if an emotion is mine versus something from someone else? Is that the question?
Yeah, somebody else, or when something's infiltrated, probably quite different actually, when something's infiltrated your energy field, but yeah, or you've picked the emotion up from somebody else, that you've spent time with, perhaps.
I mean, I would lean towards, if you're having an emotion arise, it's going to almost always be your emotion. Now, the origin may have been that someone else's emotion arose and came in and it triggered an emotion in you. But it will almost always arise as your emotion. The question is how can you actually learn to listen to your emotions? And so I think we mentioned this before, but emotions are there for a reason. They are actually teachers. They come with messages, very clear. And so for me, how to learn to distinguish if your emotion is coming because there's something that's going on with you, or if it's because something's going on with the person in front of you, is to learn to listen to your emotion, to learn to listen to the emotion that is arising. If something's arising that isn't yours, you won't be able to hear it. You won't be able to hear the guidance of it. And this is something that when we actually build relationships with our emotions, when we learn to come into an empowered state with our emotions, then we actually get to listen to why they're arising. And so if somebody else is in your space, and let's say something is arising that may be crossing a boundary or maybe some kind of threat to you in any way, then the emotion is rising within you still to give you that warning. It's telling you, okay, there's something that you want to shift here. There's something that you want to do here. Again, emotions almost always are calling us into more presence. They're calling us to pay attention. Okay, what's happening here? Are they always correct? No. Sometimes emotions are linked to memories. Sometimes emotions are not linked to the present moment. And so again, the more that we can actually create empowered relationships with our emotions, work with them the same as you would work with a plant outlay. If you can start to, okay, well, this is an emotion that arises a lot. Let's say I have a lot of grief arise, or I have a lot of fear arise very often, then this is an emotion that you may want to take some time to cultivate a relationship with it, so that one, you can expand your capacity to hold it when it enters your body, so you don't become overwhelmed by it or you have to shut down because you're making yourself vulnerable when you do that, but also so you can actually listen to it. And so how you can differentiate is by cultivating a relationship with your own emotions, because then the same as when you know your plant allies, you know if it's your plant allies, you have this cultivated relationship where you've spent the time getting to know them, where you understand them, where you have this communication, and so those questions and doubts become less because you actually know them.
Yeah, so it's bringing us into that place of being comfortable being sat in a negative emotion or perceived a negative emotion, and we're not generally. Quite often we feel a negative emotion and we just want to get rid of it. We want to get out of it. We want to raise our vibration back to the light or whatever, but how do we kind of cultivate that emotional resilience of being able to sit there with it? Or is it, how do you define that? Yeah.
I mean, this is where the plants can help. So you can definitely ask for help with the plants and practice. It's intentionally opening. And how can you build the resilience to sit with a negative emotion? Honestly, curiosity. That is such an essential part of it, is when an emotion arises, looking after yourself. So I don't want to disregard, if your nervous system is activated. So if fear arises and your nervous system is activated, then in that moment, it's unrealistic to say, I'm just going to immediately be able to listen to the wisdom of this emotion. You take care of your nervous system, you self-care, you take care of yourself, you do what you need to do to regulate. And once you are in a regulated state, then curiosity, again, why is this emotion arising? What is it trying to do? What is the magic? What is the medicine of this emotion? I feel like grief is such a good example for this. Grief gets such a bad name. in the world, in society. Everybody's doing everything they can to avoid grief. It's like, and I find this a lot in my one-on-one work, we're so terrified of feeling grief. There's almost this sense that we don't know if we will survive if we feel grief. And yet grief is one of the biggest heart openers. I mean, it can absolutely close your heart, or it can open it beyond words. Like, grief is one of the greatest teachers of love. To truly learn to love, to truly learn to step into a higher emotion, a higher vibe emotion, to open our hearts fully to love, is to fully accept and be comfortable with grief, because we live in a world of impermanence. And so that means that anything that we fully open our heart to will change. At some point it will leave. And so to fully be in love is to fully be in grief. There isn't this differentiation. And so again, when a negative emotion is coming up, be curious. What is its magic? If this emotion is here to serve you, and it may be that it is stuck in the past, it may be that it's linked to old memories, it may be that it isn't a present day thing, but then there's a beautiful mirror. It's giving you this view of, okay, here's something that I want to go back and I want to gift myself. I want to offer myself. How can I begin to create an environment where my emotions can come into present day? How can I begin to take care of myself and to heal some of these past woundings, to liberate the natural essence of my emotions? So again, it's like this separating our stress cycles and our memories and maybe traumas, small t, big T, from emotions themselves. And seeing them, these are separate. Emotions have their own magic. So curiosity, just when it arises, how can you build more curiosity?
And I found as well that meditation creates this kind of distance, doesn't it, between the observer and what you're looking at, and that includes your emotions. So I've used this technique for years. I learnt it from Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche long time ago. The stillness, silence and spaciousness. And I actually use it for lots of different things, including communicating with plant spirits, or to get myself into the state of communicating with plant spirits, but also if I need to look at a particular emotion. So just going into stillness and then the silence, and you take a long time to kind of work through this, but stillness in the body, silence, and then spaciousness. And so you go into that natural state of the mind, and from there you can just you just allow that emotion to be there in front of you and just hold it and look at it from this kind of like observer perspective, feeling it as well, but not allowing it to, it's not ruling you, it's not ruling your behavior, it's not dominating you, it's just being and just allowing it to be and just seeing what's in it. It's like you say, it's almost like a crystal ball. You can just kind of like, okay, where did this emotion come from? When did I first feel this? Oh yeah, I've had this since, that happened to me when I was a child, or actually that was my dad's, whatever it was. But you can see it more clearly if you've just got this little bit of a distance as well. So yeah, do you have any other practice that you use for actually kind of looking at your emotions?
Lots. But interesting in a response to yours, because I mean, there's a very simple, 3 different awareness points that you can use with emotions. And the one that you just mentioned, where you're kind of stepping back into the observer, you're not pushing it away, you're just taking a step back so it's not so overwhelming, is one of them. And also, if we don't come back into the body to then fully feel it, it may not actually complete, it may not actually, emotions want to be felt. They want to, and that may not mean that, if we're out in public and we get a fit of rage and, it may not be appropriate to start smashing things with our rage, but that emotion actually wants to be felt. So for example, you could do a practice where you first understand it, and I would always recommend, and then give yourself spaces to fully feel your emotions, to just feel them, creating spaces where it's almost just without the story, just allowing the emotions to flow and to be felt. And so you can be the witness, and then you can also experiment with moving into an emotion and being like, okay, it fully takes over me. I fully feel it in a safe space at home. You're not going to like affect anyone. But there's a spot in the middle, which to me, when we're working with emotions, is one of the most powerful. And you can kind of move by going between them, which is you can be the observer while also fully having the emotion move and express itself. And so there is this middle point where your body is fully feeling, the emotion is being expressed, the emotion is being felt, whether that is in stillness without an external expression, or whether it is in a healthy expressed manner, where the emotion is fully moving and being felt, but we can actually still be the observer and still notice, oh, this emotion is moving through me, almost like you would. To me, it's so similar to working with a plant ally, in the sense that you are really learning to understand and work with this energy as an ally. And so it's really good, especially when we're overwhelmed with emotions and it's a little bit too much, to be in the observer and then to experiment with, okay, what happens if I fully, like, just get lost in it? I put like a song on and I just switch the song on. I set a container and I'm just going to fully feel the emotion. And then what happens when you do the middle? Like, what happens when you go, okay, I can experience this, but I can also see it. I can also communicate with it. I can receive its wisdom.
Yeah, but emotions don't ever sit in isolation, do they? So there can be a myriad of emotions going through when you actually kind of like allow that process to happen. So yeah, it can be quite a roller coaster.
Well, this is emotional fluidity, because actually emotions in their natural state, if you watch a child or a baby, like, they move through so many different emotions in a very small, like, space of time, because they just feel the emotion, fully express the emotion, and then they move on. Oh, the next emotion, okay, fully express that, I fully feel that, and they move on to the next. Like, our emotions are actually very fluid, and we do have this kind of view that emotions do live in isolation, in terms of, okay, well, if I'm feeling grief, I can't feel anything else. And yet actually, when we learn that emotions can just move through us, that then you can actually hold opposing emotions, and you can even start to call in emotions that are going to be supportive. So if you're going through a long period of pain or grief or something that's just challenging, you can choose, the same as you can work with your plant allies, you can call in some of your other emotions to support you, not to get rid of this one. And that's the key element. We're not looking to get rid of any of our emotions, but to support us, because all of our emotions get to live together. We get to move between them, and actually moving between them is what stops us from burning out. It is what keeps us nourished. Being able to move between grief and bliss in a few moments is what allows us to keep going. And I do notice that, interestingly, a lot of people are more trapped and more disconnected from the higher emotion, like from a true embodied higher emotion. And there's so many people who aren't able, and myself included, for a very long time, where I was very strong, I was very stoic, I was like very stable, but I didn't have access to like joy and to bliss and to aliveness. There was an element of like numbness. So, I was very strong and I could survive experiencing a lot of the difficult emotions, and I was very stable in that. But I'd also kind of cut off this experience of those beautiful emotions which nourish us, which, as a human in this world, as I'm pretty sure most people know, it's hard work. Like, it's hard work being human. And so having that ability to be able to experience those higher emotions and the lower ones is what nourishes us. It helps us to keep going. Like, those higher emotions will support us in the more challenging ones. They really feed each other. They're not fighting. They're friends, for sure.
Yeah, it's surprising to realise that we've got fear around positive emotions, isn't it? You know, we're fearful. We create resistance and blockages towards, you know, like bliss or joy or love. So and even inner peace, people kind of like maybe are addicted to being kind of erratic and are resistant to allowing the peace in. You actually kind of mentioned this to me, and so I just thought I'd kind of mention it back and see if you could kind of elaborate on it and just explain that a bit more. Resistance to peace. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not a conscious choice. I think most people who, in an embodied sense, are that, they won't be wanting to do that. That's not necessarily a choice. However, there's many different aspects to this, but a couple of the ones that I'm going to mention would be something like, one, most of us have fallen from grace, or we've had our heart broken. And so that experience of innocence, of stepping into the world in innocence, of feeling the bliss, the joy, of feeling the love, feeling the hope, and then having it taken off us, having the grief of that, and not having the support of the grief. Again, we haven't been shown how to work with the difficult emotions. And so often these beautiful emotions come with, well, what happens when it stops? What happens when I lose it? What happens if it changes? And so there can be this subtle fear to allow ourselves to go there. And somebody who's had their heart broken a number of times will know this, like, to actually step into opening your heart to someone again, or to loving again, is extremely vulnerable. Because it's like, well, will I survive again? Can I handle another heartbreak? Can I handle more grief? And again, this is where that emotional resilience comes in, is when we know that we can handle the lows, when we can make it through, when we can be with that, then it gives us more capacity to step into those beautiful emotions, to not be so afraid of them. The other aspect of this also is that, well, there is also some conditioning. We do actually have a certain messaging around feeling too many good emotions and it being seen, like socially being seen as too happy, or socially being seen, there is an element of glorification of, no, okay, we need to be humble and like seem less happy than we are. And so there's also some conditioning. And then there's also, if you've gone through a period of time where maybe you haven't felt these emotions, even if that is deeply uncomfortable, even if you hate every minute of it, your nervous system knows you can survive it. And so there is also an element of a different emotion that you haven't experienced much will at the beginning. And this is why you work with emotions consciously. You choose to, okay, I'm going to begin to train and open my experience and my relationship to, say, bliss. Because at the beginning, bliss might actually be felt by the nervous system as a stressor. And so it might actually create a stress response because your nervous system wants you to stay in homeostasis. It wants you to stay alive, to stay safe. And even if you are really, really sad or feeling really low for a long time, even if it's really not pleasant, even if it's deeply uncomfortable, even if it's incredibly challenging, from a survival perspective, you're still alive. And so your nervous system is like, okay, well, at least we know that we can still be alive. If I feel bliss, I don't know if I can survive that. That's like an experience that's so far out there. And so you can have a few different aspects. But yeah, I definitely, interestingly, find that a lot of people are much more happy to come in and do more healing work on their, okay, I want to keep healing, and I want to keep healing, and I want to keep dealing with my grief, and I want to keep dealing with my sadness. And yes, they do deserve a lot of work, and it's also equally as important to practice opening ourselves and stepping into that vulnerability of, can we actually allow ourselves to feel joy? And can we allow ourselves to feel joy in a very uncertain world, in a world where we're constantly being given messages of danger, constantly being given messages of guilt also, because we're constantly surrounded by so many other people suffering? Can you actually open yourself to joy? And again, this is the resilience part, and hold it both. Can you hold the suffering? Can you hold your own suffering, the suffering of the world? And can you also hold joy? Can you also hold bliss? And that expansive nature of like, how much can you hold is also how much you can hold life. That will often be very linked to how alive you feel as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. And it comes back to this dualistic nature of life, doesn't it? You know, if anybody's looked at the your birth chart, your astrological birth chart, you know, the zodiac signs are in a circle and there's an axis, you know, there's kind of like if you're a Virgo, then the opposite of that on the chart is Pisces. And so this Virgo Pisces axis, which is you and I actually, Donna, I just realized. That particular axis says, as a Virgo, I have to learn how to hold the Piscean qualities, you know, because it might be a bit more difficult for me. So, but it always comes back to the middle way, doesn't it? It's kind of like, how do we hold both sides of it? And that's why I love the plants, because they kind of show us the dualistic nature of reality. And when you kind of have a realization with a plant, or they give you a teaching, they kind of show you from kind of a higher perspective, don't they? So they're kind of shown, for me, it feels like they're coming from that unconditional love place where it's kind of like, yes, it's happened, it's okay, you're forgiven, everything, or whoever did it, you know, they were just a victim themselves, victim, perpetrator, you know, it just goes round and round. They teach you from a multi-life perspective. So that, yes, this is just all a life experience. And so it's just kind of everything's just brought back to this neutral point all the time. And I just really love that about plants. But I wanted to actually just loop back to grief because it's such a fascinating subject, grief, because in the West, we really don't know how to deal with it. And we've been in indigenous communities, you know, I know a lot about African communities, and so they just deal with grief in a much different way, and they know that it has to come out. You know, at funerals, you have to cry, else you're not allowed to leave. That kind of like, you know, you have to let it out. Whereas here, it's kind of, you know, it's almost kind of like hold it in, stiff upper lip, and so it gets suppressed. And what I found is that it just goes deeper and deeper into the energy field, deeper into the psyche, into the subconscious, and then it's even more difficult to get out. And so when people start working with grief, like with the rose, for example, Rose is the queen of grief, the godmother of grief, rather. She really helps to see where we've closed down the heart because of grief. And so there's just this beautiful process that we can kind of go through to bring it up. But there's always a lot more than we realise. Always. Even when we think we've done our grieving, there's actually a whole new layer. So my question to you is, with all your experience with working with other people, can we ever process all of our grief? You know, because I felt I've released lifetimes of grief. You know, working with ayahuasca just took me through so many lifetimes of grief. You know, and it came out in my skin as eczema for 3 years. It was chronic eczema, and I was crying for 6 months. And, you know, it was just, and it was just like a bottomless pit. And eventually, I kind of got to a kind of a balanced place. But how do I know if I'm done or not?
I want to preface it by saying that as I speak on grief has been my deepest and greatest teacher for the last year and a half. And so this is an emotion that is very, very near and dear to my heart, and that I have absolutely fallen in love with. And so I just want to share that before I say anything. There's a couple of aspects to this that come up for me. One, which is the idea that we need to be fully healed at any point. When do I know that I'm done processing it? There's kind of this concept that there is an end point, rather than a human experience. And the human experience is consistently fluid. It is consistently bringing it up, and we, at least at the moment, we live in a grief-filled world. So even if you happen to process every inch of your grief, you are consistently encountering more grief. Grief is an essential part of life, because every time we say goodbye to something, every time something changes. Even when we have the best things that ever happened to us. I mean, there is an element of grief because you're saying goodbye to a version of you that you used to be. So every aspect of life, even the most beautiful points, contain grief in them. And so the concept that, well, we need to be able to get to a point of releasing it all, I would almost come back and be like, what if there isn't an end point, and it is we process the grief that is causing us harm, that's holding us back. And to me, that level of processing is actually building resilience with grief. It's building a relationship with it, so that then when it keeps arising, that you can process it as it arises. Another thing I will say is there are certain emotions that it can be really helpful to have a practice, the same as you have your meditation practice, to regularly process. Grief is one of them, anger is another one, and actually joy is another one. And the reason you actually have these three, and so what that would look like is saying, okay, once a month or once every 2 weeks, I'm going to set aside half an hour to fully feel these emotions. And you can just pick a song for each one, press play, and you're going to just fully feel, say, grief first. Grief, then anger, then let's say joy. And even if you can't feel it, you're just going to act it, you're going to embody it, you're going to do, you might like pretend to sob, and you're given this space where grief knows that it's welcome, that it can be processed in a safe space and choosing. And so there are certain emotions that are going to consistently be coming up, where actually having a regular practice to give space for them is really helpful. Now, the reason I actually said 3 emotions, or at least 2, is because another part of this is that emotional fluidity part that we spoke, which is that we have this concept, well, if there's grief, there can't be joy. If there's grief, well, I have to process the grief until I can be happy, until I can open my heart, until. And again, well, do we need to be fully healed? Is it possible as a human to be completely fully healed in order to also open ourselves to other things? And so, yes, as grief comes up to be processed, I would also invite in, well, can you process grief and also allow yourself to practice moving from grief into joy? And so where I just said you could have a practice, you actually would move through the emotions. So let's say you did one song with grief, one song with anger, and then one song with joy. And you're basically training your nervous system, oh, I don't need to get trapped in any emotion. I can consistently process my grief. I don't need to do anything big because it doesn't block my joy. It doesn't stop my happiness. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, thank you. That's a really, I'm sure everybody will think that's a really great thing to do. I'm going to practice that, actually. I think that's really good, just to because I'm sure during those songs that you're playing, stuff's just going to be coming up and you're processing it and releasing it, because the thing that we're kind of getting to is that we're much healthier people, physically healthier, not just emotionally healthier, but physically healthier by processing our emotions. Because grief, for example, can cause all kinds of issues in the body, from asthma, things to lung-related issues, to even contributing to cancers. I mean, when it's not processed, it's a really physically detrimental emotion. So these kind of stronger emotions that we're really fearful of, it's really important to process them, absolutely. And what other plants are your favourites for working with for your emotional processing?
I mean, at the moment, dulse has been amazing. So seaweed has been amazing. Have been working with that for a number of months. Cacao is very beautiful for processing emotions. It's one of the reasons why it is often so powerful for so many people who sit and do it, because once again, it actually gets things moving in the body. What are some of my other favorite plants for processing emotions? You know what, actually, nettle for me for anger is a really powerful one. But I am quite, anger tends to be an emotion that I have to work with more consciously because it isn't an easy emotion for me. And so the same as with plants. Some emotions we're going to like have really easeful relationships with, and some others we have to like consciously continue to build a relationship. And nettle really like pushes it out of me. It kind of like is very, yeah, it has a way of helping me to access my own anger and to understand it a bit better.
Okay, wow. Yeah. Yeah, for me, I'd say that I love San Pedro, the cactus. I think that's just such an amazing heart healer, and really helps. It's kind of like, well, they call it the grandfather, don't they? Because it's kind of like, it's like your grandfather giving you a big hug and telling you it's all okay. And then when you've got that, you're like, oh, you can open into the heart chakra. You can open into the heart and see what's in there. And yeah, for me, the San Pedro is just, so beautiful. You mentioned dulse and the dulse seaweed, and just to let everybody know that, nice little segue there, that Donna and I are running a plant diet in April, and it's an online plant diet with seaweed, because with the dulse seaweed. And it's all about self-abandonment, isn't it? It's like, how do we abandon our true self in certain situations? Like, how do we, so for example, some people don't deal with conflict very well. And so when a situation of conflict comes up, then the mind goes blank, or we go into freeze, or we just go into a shake. You can't think straight. You know, how do we move through those situations of self-abandonment? And so, we're going to be running this online dieta. I'm going to be sending out dulse essence to all the participants, and some seaweed as well. And so, we've got a kind of a discount at the moment. There's like 10% off the joining fee. If you want to join us, do. So, Donna, tell us a little bit more about your experience with dulse. What's the spirit of dulse like? The spirit of dulse.
Well, it's interesting because when you actually just mentioned just like the grandfather and that holding and that unconditional love, I feel like this is so much of the medicine of healthy relationship. Is, can we actually feel like we belong in order to come into relationship? And so you mentioned like, yeah, having healthy emotions is good for our health, and it's good for many things. It's also good for our relationships. It's, if we are able to actually hold ourselves in wholeness, then we're going to be much more able to come into relationship in wholeness. And dulse has been, it has been such a beautiful holder for this. Almost like this real sense of unconditional love and belonging that allows me to do some of that deeper work, that creates like this very safe and held foundation in which that I know that I am unconditionally held, and through which I can actually begin to explore some of these core wounds, hold them in wholeness with love, and that it supports to hold me, almost really like this loving father, this like, hey, okay, you're going to like learn to hold this, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you to hold some of that weight. And even more so than when we come into a relationship with another. It's like, okay, can I hold my imperfections? Can I hold my emotions? When I am face to face with another, can I not be hiding parts of myself? Can I not be trying to like suppress emotions and something arise? Can I actually show up into an interaction and just be seen and fully see? And I feel like dulse provide this beautiful relational loving holding where you feel so unconditionally loved and held, like you belong, that you can then actually, it's been a real relational teacher for me of what it is to be in healthy relationship and in healthy intimacy. And yes, intimacy with partners, but with family, with the world, even like relationship with the news, what it is to, okay, well, how many parts of me, when they feel threatened, when they feel unsafe, do I act in ways that are not in alignment with truth when I'm seeing the news or when somebody says something that I don't like? Whereas Dulce has really taught me to, oh no, okay, I can hold myself and I can hold the other. I can receive myself and I can receive the other. I can see the other. I don't have to leave myself, abandon myself, lose myself just because I come into relationship with another. And so there's this real element of like gentle inner power and inner holding where we can really show up in the world. It's been such a beautiful journey. I've been dieting with Dulce for a number of months now, and so it's been truly beautiful.
Beautiful. It was the first underwater plant that I'd ever worked with. And the reason why I decided to work with seaweed was because astrologically we're in this time of like Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, and it's, you know, they've been in there for a while and they're going to remain in there for a while. And so what we're experiencing is like a dissolving of the structures of our reality. You know, everybody's going through really intense times, really intense kind of transformational times. Our life is changing really rapidly, and so our known universe is kind of like changing. It's very, but at the same time, it's still very watery. We don't know where the truth is, and you know, and where the illusion is, and so we can lose parts of ourself in that. And so it's kind of, you know, I found that Dulce really helped me to kind of just be empowered and stand within myself, to just be the observer, but standing in my truth, the truth of who I am. And also what I found was that it kind of helped me, this kind of like this masculine energy really helped me to kind of overcome trauma from past relationships. So yeah, it's just been a beautiful thing. So I'm really kind of honored that you are participating and holding this with me, and we're going to be not only holding space for everybody, but we're actually Donna's going to be really taking people through a lot of processes. So I'll be holding the kind of shamanic space, Donna will be holding the embodiment space, and we'll be taking people through lots of different practices and processes and inner journeys to embody the Dulce and to kind of work through blockages. So yeah, really looking forward to that. And we've come to the end of the webinar, and I want to thank you, Donna, for such an interesting and beautiful way that you've just eloquently taken us through like this, the dynamic forces of the emotions. It's just been beautiful. Thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom. And I've just really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody has as well. And yeah, I look forward to meeting you all at the next webinar. I do these webinars once a month, and I do online classes as well at the School of Natural Esoterics, and then we've got a program of in-person plant diets and courses and all sorts going on this summer. So yeah, lots to dive into in the world of inner transformation and with the plants. So thank you everybody, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.